Hello, everybody. I hope you're well, and I'd like to welcome you to another MyCom podcast. My name is Pope-Seiberling, and you're listening to the third of 4 podcasts. This podcast is on guest readiness. The first podcast we talked about church health. The second podcast we talked about outreach events. And the third podcast we're talking about guest readiness. If your church is really great at getting people to come to your church, but they don't stay at your church, maybe they come once and then they never come back, you have, in all likelihood, some sort of guest readiness issue. What exactly is guest readiness? Well, let me ask you, if you were having someone super, super, super important come to your house, what would you do to be ready for your guest? Think about that. What would you do to make your house guest ready? Well, some of you might be thinking, well, there's some things around my house I might pick up, some cleaning that I might do, some vacuuming that I might do before the guest arrives. Maybe some of you are thinking more in the area of food. Yes, I know so many United Methodists out there are amazing bakers. You have special cakes and cookies that you like to make, and I like to eat them, so thank you so much. But sometimes we make special food preparations for our guests to make them feel welcome, to make them feel comfortable, to make sure that their needs are met. I had a friend, and her in-laws are coming to visit her. She had not had her in-laws to her house for over 5 years. They had lived far apart from each other, and the in-laws are coming to visit, and she actually painted a room before they arrived because she was so nervous about the impression that she would make. So guest readiness is simply preparations that we would make to prepare for guests. Now, when we talk about guest readiness, be very careful that you don't just think about what my building looks like. Guest readiness covers all aspects, and we're going to talk about that a little later and why guest readiness covers all kinds of aspects. Hebrews 13:2 says, "Be sure to welcome strangers into your home. By doing this, some people have welcomed angels as guests without even knowing it." As I read this passage, I'm really struck by the fact that when we welcome people in our homes, when we show people hospitality, they could be angels and we don't even know it. So it really helps me think of each guest, each person who enters the doors of your church as an angel. Not as someone we have never met before, not as someone who might be a threat to us, but as an angel. So someone who is worthy of our hospitality. And you don't know which ones are angels and which ones are humans, do we? So every person, to be on the safe side, we treat them as though they are angels. So what is the difference between being friendly and being hospitable? As I work with churches over a long period of time, I hear churches tell me over and over again, we're so friendly, we're so friendly, we're so friendly. And sometimes friendly means we're nice to each other. And that's awesome. That's great. There's nothing wrong with being nice to each other. But hospitality is really something that is extended to people we don't know. And sometimes when we're talking about people that we don't know, it gets a little scarier than being friendly to people we do know. Hospitality has a root word, do you see it? Like in hospital. And that word means to have strength and power. And so when I think about hospitality in the sense of it being something that has real strength, real power, real depth, real potential to change people's lives, that really adds a different meaning to me. I want us all to think about our churches and how we demonstrate hospitality to our guests. When people come to our churches, do they feel like they're welcome? And when I say do people feel welcome at your church, I'm not talking about people just like you. I'm talking about all kinds of people, all ages, races, gender, socioeconomic classes. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they're in a friendly, hospitable environment? Okay? Because that's done in a lot of ways. It's not just what we say to each other. Not showing hospitality can be a look that we would give someone. It could be how we keep our buildings. Um, so think about that as we continue through our podcast. So I want you to think about one time when you have experienced hospitality. One time where you have just felt so incredibly welcome. Now, this does not have to be hospitality in a church. It can be hospitality when someone really welcomed you into their home. It could be a hospitality experience of a really nice hotel that you stayed at, and the people who worked there were so friendly and so helpful. You can experience hospitality at a hospital where the nurses and the doctors are just they go above and beyond, or at a nursing home. But I want to talk to you today about what I think is the quintessential hospitality experience, and that is if you have ever visited a Disney property, whether it be Disney World, Disneyland, one of their resorts. I know they've a couple years back they opened a resort in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. I heard it's wonderful and fabulous. But I want you to think, if you've ever been to a Disney property, about what Disney does to make you feel like you belong at Disney World. I have never heard anyone say, I went to Disney World and I instantly felt like Disney did not want me there. Okay? When I talk to people about going to Disney World, especially Magic Kingdom, they talk about as soon as I entered the park, I was taken with awe. It was so beautiful. Everybody was saying hello. I had a warm feeling. I was so happy. All right. So, what are some of the things that Disney World does? One thing Disney World does really well is they're really great at making themselves available to answer questions. All right. They're really great at giving people quality experiences. All the kids love waiting in line to see the princesses, to see Mickey Mouse, to see Donald Duck, but they're providing them with a unique experience. What ways can we do that in our church? I'm not suggesting that your pastor dress up in a Mickey Mouse costume. That's not what I'm trying to articulate at all. But I will submit to you that when you're at Disney World, no one feels bad when they ask a question. No one can't find a ride at Disney World. Now, if you can't find a ride, you can ask someone, and they're always happy when you ask. But I want you to think about maybe that coffee shop you love, or that restaurant you love, or the hotel you love, or that park or resort that you love, and ask, why do I love it? What do they do there that makes my experience so perfect? And then I want you to take that feeling, those experiences, and I want you to pick them up and translate them to your church. Here's the thing. I don't think churches are trying to be inhospitable. I really do believe that most churches want to be friendly. But the reality of it is, churches have bad hospitality habits. Now look at this guy. He is really going to town. He is picking his nose. And I tell my churches, everybody picks their nose. We all have boogers, okay? The issue isn't, do you pick your nose? The answer is always yes, we pick our nose. The question is, are you picking your nose at a good time and in a good place? And so the question isn't, does my church have fights? Yes, every church has fights. The question is, are you fighting in the right time and the right place? Can my church be exclusionary and cliquey? Yes, every church can be exclusionary and cliquey at times, not all the time, but there's a appropriate time for the members of your church to gather with each other, and then there are inappropriate times for your church members to gather and talk to each other. One bad hospitality habit that really just sends me off, or that I find a lot of churches have, is during the greeting time. Does your church have a time where you get up and you shake hands and you greet each other? That is a wonderful hospitality tool if it is used correctly. But the reality is, the average church member has gotten into a bad hospitality habit. Your church members will, and I challenge you, pastors and lay people, to watch this Sunday in church and pick out a couple people and see who they go and talk to. Do they go and talk to new people, or do they go and talk to the people they already know who they need to touch base and talk with, or friends? You're going to find that it's the latter. Most people get up and they talk to friends. They don't talk to first-time guests. It's just not a natural human thing to do. It's a bad habit. Okay, so we need to retrain our laity to talk to first-time guests during that time, because we all get in the habit of talking to our friends, which isn't a lot of fun if you are a first-time guest, because you probably don't have any friends at the new church yet. So here is just one example of the fact that churches are not bad. Churches are not trying to be mean. It's a matter of laity being trained about who they should talk to and what they should say to those people. It's a bad hospitality habit. And the good news about habits is habits can be broken. I have 3 suggestions for churches that probably have some bad hospitality habits. First thing I say is processes need to be put in place. And what I mean by that is, if you have no system for first-time guests get what exactly you have planned for them, which is nothing. Okay? So if you have no process in place about how first-time guests are to be greeted, how first-time children in your Sunday school class are to be handled, how first-time babies in the nursery are to be checked in, and how the parents are to be communicated what your policy is if their child cries, or if you're going to be changing their baby. If you have no process in place to welcome visitors and communicate with them, you will not be, in all likelihood, welcoming them. And in all likelihood, you probably won't ever see that person or that family again if there's no process in place. Also, after that first time visit, what's your process? What's your process to inviting them back? What's your process for helping them get information? What's your process for making sure they know how to join the church? What's your process for making sure they get tied into ministries where they're gifted and they're passionate? All this needs a plan and a process. It doesn't happen organically and naturally. It happens best when there's a process. Second, your volunteers need trained. Like I mentioned earlier, it's so easy for churches to get into those really, really bad habits. And training is just a reminder for our laity and our key volunteers about why we do what we do. Yes, everybody knows during greeting time, and ushers and greeters know I'm not supposed to greet my friends. I'm supposed to greet new people. But sometimes just that training, that gentle reminder about why we put other needs in front of ourselves, are the most important thing. And then there needs to be a change in mindset. And the change in mindset is that the guests are more important than the people who are already in the pews. The guests are more important than the people who are already in the pews. We're winning souls for Jesus Christ. If your soul is already won, our focus is on those who don't have that relationship yet, or who don't have a relationship with the church yet. And that's a huge mindset, that we are going after people who and we're trying to please the people who are not yet in our pews. I submit to churches that they complete this guest readiness exercise. And this guest readiness exercise just helps us start thinking and seeing things from a guest perspective. When you have been at a church for 20, 30, 40 years, it's hard to understand how a first-time guest will experience the church. So what I do is I tell a team to pretend you just moved into your neighborhood. You, your spouse, and 3 children, a 9-month-old, 7-year-old, and 13-year-old. I do this because there's a baby, an elementary age child, and a preteen child. So if it's hard to find your nursery, if it's hard to find your youth room, those things are going to come out during this exercise. So those 3 ages of the children are chosen very strategically. So you, your spouse, and these 3 children, you know no one, and you don't know much about the area. And you decide to attend your church for the first time. From the time you drive or walk onto the church property till the time you leave the church property, what is your experience like? What is it like for you? Do you have a good experience? Do you have a bad experience? Did people say hello to you? Did people help you find rooms? Is the building neat? And this is the thing, when you enter a restaurant, you are taking in all kinds of data. You're taking in smells, you're taking in the sounds, you're taking in the sights. And just by all these subliminal message centers, you are deciding whether or not this is going to be a good restaurant experience. The same is true of churches. When you are in the parking lot, you are deciding before you even get into the building whether or not you're having a good experience or not. So our parking lots are important. Our lobbies are important places. Our children's area are important places, okay? So all these spaces that churches tend to neglect are actually to first-time guests really important spaces that we need to be paying attention to. So as you go through this first-time guest mock pretend thing, I want you to ask what happens to you. Do you know what to do? So many people nowadays didn't used to go to church when they were little. They have never been to church. And so we cannot assume that people know where to go and what to do. Okay? What are your impressions of the interior and exterior of the building? Is your building in good shape? Is your building decorated with contemporary decor? Or does it look like something out of your great-great-grandma's living room? Okay? If you're trying to reach young families and your church looks like it's something out of your great-great-grandma's living room, you have a problem. You need to work on the interior or exterior of your building. Do you know where to go? A lot of churches I find people they don't know where to go. They've never been in your building before. We don't think about it because we have been in our building, okay? Do my kids feel welcome? So how does your church deal with kids? Are they good with kids? Nobody wants to be at a church where the people hate my kids. Okay, so how do you express that you love kids and that kids are welcome at your church? Do you know about what's going on outside of Sunday worship in the church? So how am I, as a first-time visitor, supposed to find out about what's going on in the church? All right? And then do I know how to get involved? So say I come to your church and I really love it. If I don't know how to get involved, I might think you don't really need me here. And so why be here? And then what might make your experience easier? So as you go through this kind of pretend mock first-time visitor thing, I want you to think about what would have been really helpful to you. If this would have happened, I would have been happier. After you go through this, I suggest that you do what I call collect low-hanging fruit, meaning make some out the gate easy changes. Do some things, invest some money in changes in your church that are going to make you more guest friendly and are going to make everybody in your church happier. All right, let's look at some low hanging fruit that I can think of. Add signage. If your people in your church don't know where to go, signs are a great way to do that. Remove clutter. I cannot tell you how many churches I go to, and it's just papers and books and posters and piles of useless stuff in every room of the church. You need to remove your clutter. Clutter says, I don't care. And no one wants to be at a church that isn't going to care. You need to solicit honest feedback. And I know this can be really hard for churches. So I know there are churches and pastors who consistently send out secret worshipers. In other words, they hire people to come to their church to give them feedback about the hospitality of the church. If this way, we know what our first-time guests really experiencing. What are they seeing? You need to remove dated items. You need to provide training. You need to put processes and people in place. In other words, if you don't have someone designated to help with guests, you need to designate and train those people. And then if those things still aren't clicking for you, if you're still not making leeway with guest readiness, you need to ask for help. One thing I want to implore you is to be honest. If there's a room that needs some love, be honest about the room that needs love. If your worship is not as high quality as you would like it to be honest that you feel like maybe you can look at your worship. And what's really hard about this process, what's really hard about guest readiness is we are taking ourselves out of the center of the equation and we're putting the guest in that place. And I feel like anytime we're moving out of the center of what we do, it can be kind of painful and kind of difficult. But I really honestly believe that this is the way to reach new first-time guests. So I would encourage you to invite people who are not regular members or regular attenders at your church to church for just 1 week and ask them what they honestly thought of your church. Talk to people who have recently joined your church and ask them, what do you think about this? What did you think of this room? Or what did you think about this aspect of worship? Or what did you think about our exterior of our building? And I want you to be honest with me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Well, they might hurt your feelings, but say that they're not going to hurt your feelings so you can create a safe space and you can receive some honest feedback. Honest feedback can be so hard, but it's how we grow. And Jesus calls us all to grow. Jesus calls us all to be the best version of ourselves. And I feel like it is when we receive honest feedback that we can truly do that. So, prayers for all of you listeners as you move through this journey to become more guest ready. And may God bless your ministries. May God bless your ministries.